Hello, APUS government students. I'm working my way through some Zoom issues. It's like you it's like you forgot how to do it if you haven't done it for a long time. So if you're listening to this, it's because we don't have school on Wednesday. And so what we're going to do is on Thursday, we're going to take the multiple choice. You have the tools to have success for that. Right? You've got your notes, you've got your review stuff that we went over Monday and Tuesday, and you're set up for success that you can study that in your packet. You can play the Quizalize, and you can have success when we get back to school on Thursday. So that leaves us then for Friday, and that's what this video is about. Some helpful hints for Friday for the free response for you and for your squad. All right. So I'm going to look at here a couple of things for you to study and talk about, and maybe have a group chat with your squad to make sure that you're covered for all of these items. All right. The first few questions are going to center on Obergefell versus Hodges. All right. So make sure that you go back in your packet and you take a look at that. So I'm going to grab that out right here. Obergefell versus Hodges. So that was on pages 17 and 18 of your yellow packet. So read through that a couple times, and I think you'll be fine for the questions that deal with that. Obergefell versus Hodges, 17 and 18 of your yellow packet. All right, let's look at the next part of your free response. The next part of your free response is going to talk about some factors from 3.4 that presidents utilize to make Supreme Court nomination decisions. All right, so we talked about their judicial beliefs, broad versus strict construction mainly. We talked about their age, and we talked about the control of the Senate. So make sure you can talk to me about two of those three things. Their age is important because they want them younger so they can have a longer lasting impact in the court because they're there for their life. And then who is in control of the Senate? Because whoever they nominate has to be passed and confirmed by a majority of the Senate. So if it's their party, then great. They just need to make sure that enough people in their party are on board. If the other party is in charge of the Senate, well, they're going to have to make some concessions. They're going to have to make some compromises to get that person confirmed. All right. Next, I'm going to ask you about the factors that make a case cert worthy. So think about the activity that we worked on Monday and Tuesday. We talked about disagreement among the lower courts. We talked about importance of that case, and we talked about the Solicitor General being involved. All right. So make sure you can talk about those three factors. Don't diss me. Disagreement, importance, and the Solicitor General being involved in the case. All right. And then finally, there's going to be a Supreme Court analysis question. All right. So what happens with these is that you're given a case that we have talked about. All right. And you have to compare that case that we have talked about to a case in which you're going to read in the scenario. All right. In this case, it's going to have a comparison between McCullough versus Maryland. All right. So think back to the Banks case. And the big thing with that, and you don't have to relive the facts, but what you have to remember is that it dealt with implied powers. And it was the first time that implied powers were used in a case. The Congress has powers outside of those that are just mentioned. That's what implied powers are. All right. And the case that you're going to read about is going to talk about, guess what? Implied powers. So that's the connection that you're going to first have to make. McCullough versus Maryland was about implied powers. This case mentions and is about implied powers too. So that's the first connection. All right, let's see what else it's going to talk to you about. So it's going to talk to you about similar decisions. So in the McCullough versus Maryland case, the federal government won. They have implied powers. They have a broad authority there. And then you're going to see in this case here, the exact same thing is happening. It's talking about implied powers. The federal government has these powers, and it's a broad authority with this issue, which is going to be immigration, that the federal government's going to win and have powers too. McCullough versus Maryland, federal government wins. In this case, you're going to see the federal government's going to win too. Make those connections. Finally, then, this is what trips up kids, all right? Explain an action that Congress could take to respond to this decision in this case. Right? Well, I think that there's a number of different things that you could talk about. They could talk about creating a new amendment to help cement this belief, but is that really likely to happen? No. One of the things that comes to mind is that, I think the loser in this case is going to be a state that was trying to do some stuff. All right. I think back to federalism, and I think back to potentially the federal government saying, hey, I know we won in this case. I know we won with implied powers and immigration and this issue that you lost on, state of Arizona, which it's going to be. But here's how we're going to further cement this. We're going to utilize the stick. All right. We're going to say, hey, if any other state tries to pass a law like this, you run the risk of us withholding a whole bunch of money from you. I think that would be a key thing for you to talk about, to tie the last chapter to this chapter. Because what's going to be happening is Arizona is going to try and take over immigration policy in their state. It's a federal government thing, and it's mentioned in the Constitution, and they're also going to say it's implied in the Constitution too. So there's kind of this dual issue where Arizona is going to lose, and they're going to lose pretty big. And what I think Congress could do to further kind of, I think, threaten the other states if they want to try and do something similar to Arizona is say, hey, we're going to utilize the stick if you want to try and use this like Arizona did. We're going to withhold money if you're going to try and pass policies like Arizona did. All right. Even though Arizona lost, all right, you're going to lose too in the courts, as you see now here with the precedent that was created. But here's another further way that we can do this. We can withhold a whole bunch of money if you're going to try and do this. I think that gets you there. All right. So this will be on Friday, and I think you'll have success if you listen to this video. All right. Good luck. I won't be there Friday, but I know that you'll do great. All right. Take care.